Welcome everybody, and thank you for spending your next hour with me on Good Friday. We're going to talk about how we can build a project management dashboard with SharePoint. Now, before I get started, just to give you a background of this webinar, essentially this webinar came out of our last webinar. When I did the webinar last February, I talked about 7 ways on how we can leverage SharePoint for project management success, and there were questions about dashboarding, so I thought it would be appropriate just to follow up that webinar with this. So hopefully you'll enjoy the next hour, and like Catherine says, don't be a stranger. If you have any questions, put it out in the chat room. Most likely if you're wondering about something, other participants are wondering about that too. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, as we all know, in any project environment, having some kind of reporting or some kind of metric measurement is critical. So what we're going to do in the next hour, once we finish this, we'll see how we can take advantage of SharePoint and use this to build a project management dashboard. We'll hone in on key topics such as how we create reports with custom views, and from these reports be able to develop visually relevant key performance indicators or KPIs. These would be things like red, amber, green, right? Or status information on how many percent or how successful a specific aspect of a project is. So we'll look at how we can do that with out-of-the-box tools and or third-party products. And then lastly, we'll talk about how we can automate status reporting with SharePoint alerts or notification to key stakeholders, for example. So a quick background of myself for those who don't know me. As Catherine mentioned, I wrote the book SharePoint for Project Management, and currently my company is Innovative E. We're a company based out here in the greater Washington, D.C. area in Atlanta, Georgia. We provide business consulting services in leveraging technologies like SharePoint to help our customers. I'm also a contract author and instructor for a global training organization called Learning Tree International. And if you want to get in touch with me, my information is there, and also my information will be shown to you again as we finish with this presentation. And I understand some of you are kind of live blogging right now on Twitter, so I've got my tweet deck open as well, so feel free to engage in dialogue with me via Twitter. Okay, so for our agenda next hour, these are some of the key points we're going to talk about. So first I want to look at what a project management dashboard is. We have to understand and identify the purpose of this, and then I'll talk about the significance of identifying metrics. And then I'll go into a little bit more detail with respect to SharePoint. We'll look at how we build SharePoint lists and specifically around building metrics. And then I'll show you tools within SharePoint, how we can display visual indicators. And then we'll talk about automation with alerts, and then I'll open the floor up for the questions and answers. Okay, so first things first. I always make a big joke out of this. I said this in the chat room earlier. I said, you know, if you want to get promoted back at work, just use the word dashboard. You know, things like, hey, management, I can build you a dashboard, right? We find that quite humorous, but you know, almost every customer I talk to or high-level person I talk to, that's something big with them, you know, a dashboard. So with respect to project management, essentially a dashboard is a reporting tool, and this reporting tool is used to provide an interactive summary of a project. Now when I say summary, it could be along the lines of what the schedule looks like. Are we ahead? Are we behind? How about budget? Are we on budget, or have we spent more than what we're supposed to? These dashboards consolidate key information and measurements that are agreed upon, and essentially it's like a one-stop shop. It's a single screen, so information can be monitored at a glance, especially for busy executives and professionals. And normally these dashboards are displayed using charts and kind of visual indicators. Now, if we look at an example, let me go back here quickly. Here's an example, a screenshot of a sample dashboard, and this is straight out of SharePoint. A lot of this should look familiar to you. So for example, we can see on the upper section here, and I'm going to show you how we can build one as well. We can see key performance indicators. It says there, I don't know if you see it, it's a little small, but I'll show it to you again in a while. But color indicators, where we can say, okay, if it's red, we're in a bad spot. We're 50% behind of our schedule. If it's yellow, you know, we're kind of okay, but we got to be careful. And then we can present information in a pie chart format as well, as you can see, and then other types of visual indicators, as you can see on the left side. So this is a sample dashboard, and in fact, this is out-of-the-box sample from Microsoft Office SharePoint Server. So as we continue on, I'll show you how you build these step by step. Now, one of the things, too, that's critical before we start building these dashboards, I wanted to show you this, is I want to talk about why you want to use SharePoint, right? Why you want to use SharePoint. I don't want to assume that everybody's used SharePoint or you know about SharePoint, so let me quickly give you an introduction of what SharePoint is. And if you want further details, you can certainly look at my previous webcast, because I explained what SharePoint is in that webcast. The URL is at the bottom of the screen. So to give you a definition of SharePoint, SharePoint allows individuals in an organization to easily create and manage their own collaborative websites. So essentially what SharePoint is, it's a technology, it's a piece of software that an organization would install. So it's kind of like Windows. You know, Windows is a piece of software, or some email products such as Exchange. So it's an organization-wide software that an organization would install, but the idea is it breaks down technical barriers, so individuals such as project managers, for example, who are traditionally not as technical, will be able to build a web-based repository or a website intended for collaboration. And again, in the case of a project manager, it will be around project management collaboration. And taking it further, apart from collaboration along the lines of storing files, tracking, schedule, we can also certainly put project reporting information, or put dashboards as well. And the key is, again, project managers or anybody in the project team can do it without much technical support, because the barrier to entry, or in order to use SharePoint, the requirements are quite minimal, as long as you're familiar with Windows, as long as you're familiar with Office, and as long as you're familiar with update or surfing the web. If you're familiar with updating your Facebook status, you're a good candidate already. Okay. Now, that's as far as how I'll describe SharePoint. Obviously, there's a whole lot more to it, but at a very basic level, that's what SharePoint is. Key components of SharePoint, you got Windows SharePoint Services. Sorry about that. I'm fighting allergies here. Which is the core engine of SharePoint. And then on top of Windows SharePoint Services, or also known as WSS, is a more sophisticated or complex product called MOSS. And again, I've explained this in detail in my prior webcast, so feel free to look that up once we're done. Excuse me. So again, I just kind of showed you this dashboard earlier, so let's get started. What are the steps to create these project management dashboard in SharePoint? So here's my assumption. Before we even start creating these dashboards, my assumption, and this is kind of picking up from my previous webcast, is you already have a project website you created in SharePoint, and you want to throw in a dashboard on top of it. So the very first step you have to take in order to create these dashboards is you got to identify what you want to measure. One of the interesting things I always encounter is when I talk to customers or some people, they would say, oh, I want dashboard, I want the red, amber, green. I go, okay, and then what are we measuring? Then they're all stumped, right? Because unless you know what you're measuring, the dashboard won't mean anything. I mean, I can certainly build you, colorful charts, but what does that mean? So you got to sit down and think about, in your project environment, what are the critical elements of a project do you measure? It could be schedule, right? It could be budget. It could be risk. What else? What else do you measure in your project? Anybody? Throw it up in the chat room. Any other ideas? I can think of a bunch of other stuff. So sales, very good. So depending on the type of project you're working on, right, maybe some sales metrics. ROI, all right, good. What's due? Help desk tickets. Critical path, change request. Very good. So this is the same exercise that you have to go through. You got to sit down and decide, okay, what's the priority of this project? What are the things that we have to look at and watch out? I threw in this quote. It says, the only man who behaved sensibly was my tailor. He took my measurement and knew every time he saw me, while all the rest went on with their old measurements and expected them to fit me. Now, I put that here because what I always encounter in some project environments is they don't clearly define what they want to measure, and they just go off and saying, okay, how far along are we in the schedule? 70%. And then you ask the same question 2 weeks later, how far along are we in the schedule? 71%. But what does that mean, right? Did you guys sit down and define what 70% means? Did you sit down and define what 72% means? Personally, I don't use percent because it doesn't mean anything to me. So it's critical that you identify these metrics first. Now, part of identifying the metrics is establishing standards around these metrics. So it's one thing saying, okay, I want my dashboard to look at the schedule, or I want the dashboard to look at the milestones. Then you have to take it to the next level down and say, all right, what do we need to find out? What are some of you said there, what are the ROI that we need to look for? What's the ROI we need to look for? So it's critical that you establish good standards, and there's 3 areas around this. One is you got to have a good estimation culture in your project. So when you plan for your project, you got to set the law of the land on how you want to estimate. You don't just walk up to your resource or your team member and say, hey, Joey, how long would this building a website take? Well, if Joey has done this 10,000 times before and he says, it's going to take 4 weeks, I'll take his word for it. But what if Joey has never done this before, he's not quite sure, and he says 4 weeks? Do you just take that 4 weeks and walk away and don't ask him what that 4 weeks meant? I see that a lot. Because that 4 weeks might mean, well, if you throw more people onto it, maybe that 4 weeks will decrease. You know, instead of Joey doing it himself, if you throw 2 people, it might be 2 weeks. That's what's called a fixed effort estimate. What if it's some kind of like a fixed duration estimate where, you know, like this session, we're in this webcast for an hour. Right now there's what, 235, 233 people. Even if we had 10 people here, this webcast will still be an hour. So the estimate for this webcast is an hour regardless how many people. That's what's called fixed duration estimate. And then there's another type of estimate called resource estimation where it's very, very specific to somebody's skill set. So it might take Joey 4 weeks to build a website because he's not as experienced, but it might take Tony, I don't know, 2 weeks. So my point being is you got to set a good estimation culture and clearly define when you ask for some estimates what those mean. Now, the second piece of establishing good standards is establish good standards for tracking projects. Now what I mean by that is, okay, so you got your project schedule, you got your estimates, you got started. And as you run the project, you got, as a project manager, you have to compare what your planned schedule, planned budget, planned resources are to what's actually going on. And this is the way you can define metrics, because now you're doing comparisons. How would you know if you're behind if you're not comparing it to anything? So you got to set up a good standard around that too. And lastly, you got to get and set up a good standard for project reporting. This is the part that we're looking at in this webcast, where we're going to define what the key performance indicators are. Now, key performance indicators, is to explain it quickly to you. It's essentially, okay, what are some of the key areas in the project that we're interested in? How much have we spent? What's the budget looking like? Or where the milestones is at? I don't know. But you have to define that as well. And as for your metrics, you have to define what constitutes on schedule versus late, for example. So if you want to create like what's called a red, amber, green status, your stoplight, what constitutes being red or late? Is it 50% behind schedule? Is it 30% behind schedule? What constitutes being green? Is it, if we're 1 day behind, that's still green? I don't know. So you have to define that. Now, with that being said, the next step is you can get started by creating your SharePoint list. So you got to identify project metrics. Now let's move on to SharePoint. So with the SharePoint list, you have to define your relevant list for your project. It could be a milestone list. It could be a budget list. It could be a project schedule list, resource list. I could go on and on. Earn value. And if there's any custom views that's necessary, you have to define that as well. What custom views are, these are used to match user or group interests. For example, let's say you're interested in viewing project documents that were modified by the sponsor during initiation, so you can create a view around that. That's what custom views are. And custom views exist for your SharePoint list, and you can create as how many ever views as you want. So here's an example of a milestones list. So in this screen, in this screen, what I did is this is my project management website, and this project is called the Manila Cafe Project. This project, yes, by the way, I see some questions here. These slides will be available, and also come Monday, there will also be videos available not only on this webcast, recorded webcast, but videos available on actually doing these things. I'll show you how I created this list. I'll show you how I created the dashboards that you'll see in a while. All right. So going back to this example, number one, create your custom list. In this custom list that's built on a project management website using SharePoint, it's what's called a milestones list. So what I did here is on the left side, as you can see, it has the milestone name, and then the next column shows the WBS number. WBS stands for Work Breakdown Structure. It's just a numbering scheme. And I have a baseline finish. The baseline finish, what that means is that's when I planned, or that's how the project team planned when these tasks or these milestones will be completed. And then there's the actual finish. So we recorded when we actually finish or when we actually achieve these milestones. And then on the right side, notice that there's a variance column. What do you guys think that is? Variance. Anybody? Yeah, somebody was asking about variance. So quickly, Victor's asking about what site template I'm using. I built this site template, and I'll give this away too. All right. So variance is time to finish, date later, early. Very good. Oliver has it. The variance essentially I put up, and again, I defined this myself. This is the difference between the baseline and the actual, because that's the number I'm going to use later for my dashboard. So in the first example, we have project initialized. I was planning to finish this on, or complete this in March 12th. But we completed the project initialization on March 14th, and the variance is 2. What does that mean then? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? What does that 2 mean? Anybody? Variance of 2 for that first milestone. 2 days late. Very good. So those numbers there will tell me that how ahead or how behind I am, right? So in the third example, it's -9. That means I'm actually 9 days ahead. So that's a good thing. And that's how I define the variance column. Now, again, I realize that you might define it differently in your organization, but I just want to show you a quick example on how you can build a milestone list and then define whatever calculation you want and whatever measurement you want to look for. Okay? So that's step 1, create my SharePoint list. Now, step 2, I can start displaying these things into visual indicators. So that's just one example. And again, I could do a whole bunch, but we only have limited time here, and I want to kind of step you through this one example. So the next step is we can start building these indicators. So how do we do that? The way to do this, step 3, is we use web parts. Okay, so we can create the dashboard with web parts. Web parts are SharePoint technology That's essentially a customizable software component that's part of SharePoint. Web parts are created in the Microsoft development environment in Visual Studio using C#, VB.NET. And essentially what web parts are, you don't have to be a programmer or very, very technically savvy to use it, because the beauty of web parts is, again, if you're familiar with SharePoint, you can use these web parts and tie it into existing information. So in our case, for example, there are web parts available for visual indicators that can be used for dashboards. If you have MOSS, Microsoft Office SharePoint Server, there are a lot of built-in KPI web parts, and you can certainly purchase third-party web parts as well. So let me carry on with my example on how I did it. So based on the list I had a milestone list, and I'm going to take advantage of MOSS KPI web parts. KPI stands for Key Performance Indicators. These web parts are available out of the box with the Record Center site template in MOSS. And if you're not using the Record Center site template, you can still use these web parts, but there are certain configurations that you have to do to make it available in other site templates. And I'll put this up later as a resource for you, because it's kind of a technical discussion that has to be done on the server side. So how do we do this? How do I do this? Brian, I see your question. Just give me a second here. I'll step through these steps, and then I'll get back to your question. And Thomas as well. I'll get back to your question on that. So how do I take advantage of these web parts? Well, the first thing is relevant list should be available. So I got that done. I got my milestones list created and defined. We saw that earlier. Check. So that's done. The next step is I need to create a KPI list. KPI list. So this is how we create a KPI list. So like I said, in MOSS you can have Record Center, site template, and then create a KPI list. So you go to Site, Create KPI List, and this is like the definition screen on how I define the things I want to measure. So for example, I'm going to create a milestones KPI. I want to measure the variance, like we saw earlier, if I'm ahead, if I'm behind. So there are certain things I put in, and then at the bottom section, notice there's a criteria that I'm going to start putting in there. When do you want to display the green? When do you want to display the yellow? When do you want to display the red? So I said, okay, I want to display the green when variance is less than, the goal is 0, meaning I'm on schedule. Now, when the value is 2, right, between 0 and 2, give me a yellow. Anything other than that, give me a red. Okay, so it's as simple as that. Now, I see a bunch of questions popping up. Let me kind of get to your questions about MOS. So again, if you're not familiar with SharePoint as a technology, meaning the different components, WSS and MOSS, a couple of things I urge you. Watch my first webcast. I explain it clearly, the difference between WSS and MOSS. And then number 2, if you want to have some kind of documentation about it, I wrote a blog entry, the difference between WSS and MOSS as well. And you can go to whatisSharePoint.com, and you can see the difference between the two. Now, to answer your question about licensing and how much does it cost, what I'm demoing right now is I'm building a dashboard with MOSS. And MOSS is a more sophisticated version, not version, but component of SharePoint, and it does cost money. However, for those using WSS, I understand there's folks who are just using WSS. Just give me a second, and I'll show you an option with that as well. Okay? But if you want to understand the difference between WSS and MOSS, go to whatisSharePoint.com or watch my previous webcast. But for the purposes of this example right now, I'm demoing the one you're looking at in MOSS, and I'm using MOSS KPI web parts. If you have WSS, KPI web parts is not available in WSS. Later I'll talk about WSS and give you options, okay? All right, so with that being said, I want to carry on. So this is a screen where I defined what these milestones KPI would mean. Next. Now, after I define it, I want to look at it. So here's the deal. So the way I defined it, I said, okay, look at the milestones. I know it's kind of a little small on the bottom of the screen, but I want you to average the variance. That's what I defined in the prior screen. So what it did, it just took the variance and averaged it, and it gave me, in general, your milestones right now is yellow. The value is 0.43, which makes sense, because I said if it's anything 0 and below, that's green. In between 0 and 2, that's yellow. Anything above 2, that's red. So it's giving me a big picture view here. Okay, overall the milestones, meeting the milestones, it's in yellow. So we're not too bad here, but we can certainly improve based on where we're at right now. Okay. Now, this is another screenshot. So in the prior screenshot, we looked at the KPI, the yellow symbol, and then the actual list. But what I did is I also took that KPI and displayed it on my project homepage. And this is using the KPI web part. Again, this is another component of MOSS. So as you can see, it's right there, so we see it. All right. And it's on, and I have other information around my project website as well. But what I've done now is based on the milestones, I have some kind of status so that anybody coming to my Manila Cafe project, off the bat, they can see, oh, what's the KPI, what's the status of our milestones? They can see, oh, it's yellow. And then if they click on milestones, it will dig deeper and take them to the prior screen and show them this. Okay. All right. So with that being said, I want to cover now the other aspect. What if we're just using WSS? Okay. So again, very important for you to understand what environment you're in. So if you're not sure, oh, you have a SharePoint, go back and talk to your IT folks and ask, what are we using? Are we using WSS, the base foundation of SharePoint, or are we using MOS? Because if you're using WSS, what I showed you briefly earlier, you won't be able to do that because it's not built into WSS. You got to get MOS. So WSS does not have KPI web parts available out of the box. Okay. What are some of my options? I see some questions. I can certainly go back to those in a while. So what are your options? Number one is you can purchase third-party web parts. You can buy independent web parts, or you can buy a whole suite of products, and I'll talk about some of them in a while. Your second option is if you can't buy it, or if you don't have any way to install it, you can code these things. You can code dashboards or visual indicators using JavaScript or jQuery with what's called a content editor web part. Now, this requires some kind of coding, but if you're not quite sure how to do that, go to endusersharepoint.com. They have a whole series on building dashboards using JavaScript and jQuery. And this is very, very beneficial if you have WSS, since there's no out-of-the-box web parts. Or you can build these KPI-like functionality with SharePoint Designer. It is another Microsoft tool, which is now free. Starting April 2nd, SharePoint Designer was free, so you can download it. And again, you have to have the appropriate background to use this. Or you can have somebody program it for you using visualstudio.net. So these are your options if you're using WSS. Now, for example, I'm just giving you screenshots here. In this case, if I had WSS, I didn't have MOSS, so I don't have KPI web parts. I can certainly get third-party web parts, say from Bamboo. Bamboo has a web part called Chart Plus, and that's what you're seeing up top. And the way I've defined or used this web part is to show the variance in a bar chart format. So again, it still gives me some kind of visual indicator. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is you can go to places like codeplex.com. I believe there are some visual indicator web parts there you can download for free. And if you want a much more sophisticated visual indicator tool set, you can certainly go to places like epmlive.com, because they have a lot of great tools there for much more sophisticated dashboarding, portfolio management type of tools. Now, additional, so I just showed you screenshots as well from Dundas, again, Bamboo, and then we've got stuff from EPM Live. So there's a lot of stuff all over the place as well. And I can certainly provide you references after this presentation. Now, just to address some of the questions I have here before I venture off too far. Somebody was asking about, let's see, let's go back here. Excel Web Services. Okay, very good. Franklin was talking about Excel Web Services. It's not required. My example earlier, I did not use Excel Web Services or Excel Services. All I did is I created a custom list. You can, in fact, if you use Excel Services is another feature in MOSS. You can get much more sophisticated reporting or dashboarding, but you're not required to. You can use it, but you're not required. You can grab information from various sources. It could be a custom list, Excel service, or even some data in SQL Server. Let's see. Somebody was also asking about, I believe Catherine was asking about, is it possible to automatically update KPIs from a spreadsheet or other files housed elsewhere on a SharePoint site? The good news is the answer is yes. So what you can do is you can take, for example, a regular Excel spreadsheet, you connect it with a SharePoint list, and have the KPI connect to the list, and you can do synchronization on that as well. I have an example of that in my prior webcast. So if you check out my prior webcast, there's a part there I talk about Excel synchronization, and there's a video I put out there too. So you can do that. So the file doesn't really have to be sitting on, or the information doesn't really have to be sitting on the SharePoint server. It could be on somebody's machine, and that Excel file synchronizes with the SharePoint list, and then the list will talk to the KPI. Yeah, Peter, great resource, that path to SharePoint. Okay, great. So I made Catherine happy here. She says yay. Yes, for us, he says SharePoint design is a lot easier. True, because it doesn't require coding, and Visual Studio requires strong programming skills. However, as we know, there's a certain limitation to SharePoint design. There's only so much you could do without programming. But the good news is most likely a lot of these dashboard-like or visual indicator-like capability you should be able to do in SharePoint Designer. Okay. All right, good. So one more topic I wanted to talk about, and this kind of ties into reporting and dashboarding, is this whole idea of automated reminders. Now, one of the things, and I'm sure a lot of you know this, is in SharePoint there's what's called built-in alerts. And what alerts are? These are email notifications that you can define when certain things change. For example, somebody enters in a new date in your milestone. Somebody changed something in your milestones list as well. So once that happens, we can automatically send out an email. We can send out an email to whoever wants the information. So if we look at this example, this is just a screen where I'm setting alerts for my milestones. And keep in mind that you have to be very, very careful in defining these, because out of the box, if you just say, okay, send me an alert, out of the box, it will send you an alert for anything that changed in the milestones list, which you might not want, because you'll end up getting a lot of emails all the time, and you might just look at it as spam mail if you leave it as it is. So for example, personally, in my alerts that I've set up for my SharePoint sites for my project, I usually, if you look at the bottom, I usually define it to send it as a daily summary. So I won't get an email anytime something changed in my milestones list. And with a daily summary, I'll have a nice single email with all the notifications that SharePoint has for me. And along that line, so one time I was talking to a customer, I suggested this technique, and the customer says, well, Dux, what if something is very important that I got to know right away, or they have to tell me right away? And if you set it as a daily summary, then I won't know of it right away. I go, I think they can still pick up the phone and call you, right? Just a thought. Anyway, you know, just some techniques out there. And Victor was asking if we need to use the sync plugin. Yes, if you have Excel 07, you need that plugin so that Excel can synchronize with a SharePoint list. If you have Excel 03, it's already built in. All right? Wonderful. Well, good. So with that being said, a couple of things. Again, I want to spend the rest of the time to answer any questions you might have. This slide deck will be available for you later on, Monday onwards, as Catherine mentioned. And second, the examples I showed you, the step-by-step, I've recorded actually in a video that you can watch, and you'll hear me talking as well. And that will be available after Monday as well. So once we're done, and by the way, here's my contact, after Monday, under the link Webcast Resources, you should see a link that references this webcast and all the demos I have for you. So you'll see how I built the milestone list, how I defined the variants. You'll see how I created the KPI list using the MOS tool set and tied it back to the KPI dashboard so you can see the colors show up. All right, so now I want to open the floor to questions, because the last webcast we had a lot of questions. So I want to make sure I spend a good amount of time on that. I know you've been asking questions as I was discussing, so go ahead. From Derek, is there a web part to summarize several Excel spreadsheets and produce a summary report on the dashboard? Derek, the answer is yes, and there's different ways to do this. Now, if you just want to look at a web part, what I suggest is you go out and look for a list roll-up web part. Let me type that in. That's one way. And what you do is you take your, let's see, Excel spreadsheet. So you take your Excel spreadsheet and tie it to a custom list, and then tie these custom lists to KPI web parts. And then as an aggregation, you can take these list roll-up web parts and pull all those information at a higher level, if you may, so you can see the health of all these things. So apart from the list roll-up web part, in MOS, the KPI list can do this. You can take a bunch of lists and bring into the KPI list so you can have like an overall view. So let's say you have a bunch of projects, Project A, Project B, Project C, Project D, and then you want to roll all this up. You can use the KPI list and use the KPI web part to see the status. Let's see. Rob Schneider, how to pull lists stored in subsites or other sites, having a dashboard that goes across SP sites. Very good point. It depends. Again, there's different techniques on how you can do this. If you have WSS, the cost-effective way of doing this is to use SharePoint Designer. Since SharePoint Designer is now free, you can do like a for lack of a better word, like a higher level aggregate site. In SharePoint Designer, you can tap into all these lists and subsites or cross sites and then bring it up to a single page to look at it. Another way to do that is, again, if you have MOSS, they have roll-up type of web parts, or if you don't want to use SharePoint Designer and you have WSS, you can go out and purchase list roll-up web parts. There's a lot of people who have that. For us, Content Query web part, I haven't tried it, but I'm not too sure how much programming you have to do writing in JavaScript and jQuery to do roll-ups. So if you're comfortable with that, I suspect you could do it, but personally I haven't done that yet. Catherine, can multiple lists be tied to different Excel data in a single tab? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. There's different ways of doing this, but in short, what you do, if you have Excel 2003, what you do is in a single spreadsheet in your Excel tab, You take these different data sets and convert each one of them to what's called Excel list. Now, if you have Excel 07, you create Excel tables. And then you tie each of these data sets to separate SharePoint lists. Yeah, maybe I could do a webcast on that, using Excel and SharePoint. That would be a fun one. Right? But the answer is you could do it. Any other questions? Is Excel services for SharePoint required for these functions? Guido, very good question. The answer is no. Even if you have WSS by itself, which is the foundation of SharePoint, you don't have to have Excel services to have the Excel synchronization feature that I was describing earlier. Now, if you do have Excel services, you could do other things with it, but you don't have to have Excel services to synchronize a spreadsheet on somebody's desktop with a SharePoint list. Okay. Yes, Sadiq, this webcast will be available after Monday. Yeah. All right. Let's roll up. Yeah, and hopefully in the next version of SharePoint, we'll have this roll up available. Okay. I just signed up myself for another webcast. Maybe I should stop suggesting that. Today's date. Selena, well, let me first answer Selena's question. Is MOS required? The answer is no. The answer is no. Again, Selena, I recommend that you watch my previous webcast back in February. I clearly distinguish what WSS and MOS is. And also, if you want to read about it, go to whatisharepoint.com, and I distinguish what WSS and MOSS is. For us, what can you refresh my memory? What were you asking about today's date? William, to answer your question, is there a way to link a list to SQL table? I'm not sure what your question is about, but I'll just assume you want to take list information in SharePoint and bring it into another data source. The answer is yes. You can do it various ways. If you have MOS, you can use BDC to do that. If you don't have MOS, you can use SharePoint Designer to do that. But just to let you know, a SharePoint list is actually residing in a SQL Server database table. So if you're a DBA, you can actually go into that database table and look at that data. Can we show shared drives in the SharePoint web part? Yes. The way to do that is to use, June was asking, the way to show shared drives in the SharePoint web part is to use the page viewer web part. For us, calculations against day state example. Days remaining equals due date equals today. The answer is yes. I haven't, let me think about this. I'm pretty confident you could do it. I did something similar, but I haven't really tried it. Shoot me an email. I got my email there. Shoot me an email, remind me, so I'll check. But I think you can do it. Timothy, can SharePoint sync with other SharePoint Microsoft products? Absolutely. Outlook, you could do it with Outlook, Word, Excel. Project, you would need third-party products such as Project Publisher, or if you have Project Server. I recommend you watch my prior webcast. It's in the O'Reilly website. I talk about that, and I show you demos on synchronizing Outlook, Excel, and Word with SharePoint as well. What's the best book resource to explain how to do real things with SharePoint Designer? What do you mean by real, Rob? Real. I think what you're looking for is more practical tips, I guess, or practical ways. There's not much SharePoint Designer out there, designer books out there, but one of the books I've read or come across that's good is from I can't remember his last name. His first name is Woody something, Windishman, and he wrote a book on SharePoint Designer. But really, blogs are your best bet. You're right. Yep. Practical tips project managers need. Yeah, I don't know if there's a book on SharePoint Designer for project managers, though. There's more general books out there. But of course, you can get SharePoint for project management, right? And there's a discount code from Marcy right there. Thank you. Good. Are list roll-up web parts the best way to display your project portfolio? Again, my answer is it depends. What information would you want to roll up? schedule, budget, resource performance. Yes, the answer is yes, but there's other techniques of doing these too, like your KPI web parts. You could do it. You could use, I can think of gazillion ideas. Yeah, that's, I would say, Holly, that's your most straightforward way, I guess, your most simplistic way of doing that, is to use list roll-up web parts. You're welcome. Other questions? How often do you use custom web parts? For my line of work and for the things I do, especially for project management, very rare. My approach, though I'm very technical, my approach is I don't want to reinvent the wheel. So either I just take advantage of what's out of the box, or if there's a third-party web part that does the job, I'd go that route instead of having a programmer develop a web part for me. Because in the end, it's going to take more time and more money to do that. So in a lot of my work, especially around project management, I rarely go and have some web parts custom coded. Okay, what is the best resource to learn about built-in web parts available in MOS? You can go to Microsoft's website. I can't remember the URL, but there's a list of web parts that they show you what's available in MOS. And second, if you do have MOS, you just add a web part. Go to your web part page and add a web part. All the lists will show you in the web part gallery. What SharePoint control, does SharePoint control how often dashboards refresh? William, very good question. The beauty. So let me go back to my dashboard here real quick. So let me go back right here. So for example, in this key performance indicator section where it says milestones yellow, the updates is real time, meaning anybody updating my milestones list. So let me jump back to my milestones list. I believe it's in one of the earlier PowerPoints. So right here. So anytime somebody updates this, so somebody adds a new milestone or tweaks the date, whatever, and the KPI, the actual visual indicator, would update real time. So it's not like somebody has to manually somebody has to manually go and update that. So the beauty of this is you don't have to enter data in 2, 3, 4, 5 different places. You just put the actual data here, and boom, the actual visual indicator will reflect the information here in the milestone list. Okay. Yes, Firas is a good point. Yeah, if you just leave the page there, yeah, obviously it won't change. You just refresh the browser, then yeah, you'll see the updates. Yep. John, where's a good source of information using web parts with cross-site task lists? On the top of my head, I'm not, let's see, let me think. I'm not sure if there's anything as specific as that, but to give you a head start though, what you can do is look at using, let me think. Well, you can use SharePoint Designer because there's a web part that you can use within SharePoint Designer called Data View. So you can reference cross-site task list and bring it in a single view, single screen. And but specifically, I'm not sure if there's a resource out there. Is there any way to use SharePoint Designer building reusable web parts? Yes, the answer is yes. So if you want to create a dashboard-like capability and then you want to reuse it for other projects, you can certainly do so. Okay. Good. So it seems like there's a lot of questions about roll-ups and aggregation and synchronization with Excel. I'll think about that and put together some kind of documentation, but more importantly, what I can promise you is in my future webcast, so we'll just post up on O'Reilly, I'll certainly talk about these things, so there's a lot of great, since there's a lot of great interest. The idea of referencing information from various SharePoint sites and the idea of using Excel as well. Will these work in Access as well? Yeah, you can take existing Access information and bring it in, or even synchronize it with SharePoint and tie it to all your visual indicators. Okay, good. So good. Thank you for confirming that, Rob. Yeah, what I thought of presenting this afternoon is just to get everybody started at a very base foundational level. And then as we build on these in future webcasts, we'll talk about portfolio management, aggregation, PMO level computation, etc. Well, I recognize the time. It's currently 1:55 I have here. Any other questions?
Seems like you've answered all of them, Dux.
Good.
Oh, there's one more.
Any advice on using SharePoint to do resource availability management? There's various ways of doing this. Out of the box, obviously, there's nothing built in for resource availability, but what you can do is, you can create a custom list, create a resource list, and then do cross-list references. Or you can get a great tool. There's a tool I use called Project Publisher. Go to projectpublisher.com. And the beauty of this tool is it integrates with Microsoft Project. So if you already have a Microsoft Project schedule with your resource information, it ports it out to your SharePoint site and synchronizes with that. So in short, it shows you all the resource information as well.
Good.
Very good. Yep. Rob has the answer exactly.
Hey, Dux, there's also a question from Sandy, sent it to me, that said, did you say the pie chart was OOB out of the box, I guess, MOS?
Yes, the pie chart that I showed, the very first thing, is out of the box in MOS, yes.
Oh, good. It was quite nice.
Yes, thanks for bringing that up, Joe. EPM Live, which is another great project management tool set that sits on top of SharePoint, will come out with resource management tools as well. So with that, you don't need Microsoft Project.
Well, Dux, I think we're running out of time, and you've answered everyone's questions. So I just want to thank you for an extremely informative presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Wonderful, and thank you again for having me, and forgive me for my voice. I've been battling allergies the past 2 weeks, but yeah, just keep in touch and keep on checking out the webcast at O'Reilly. I'll be definitely doing more webcasts in the future.
Okay, and people, if you want to save the chat file, I know there are a lot of resources in there. The best way to do that is just to click in it, and you should do this now, and do select all, Control or Command A, and then just copy and paste it in another file. And if you don't manage to do that, I will have a copy of it. You can email me at webcast@O'Reilly.com, and I can send you a copy. And as I said before, we'll have the recording of this event. I think we'll have it up by Monday, and we'll send you an email. So once again, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And Dux, thanks for doing this. Looking forward to your next one.
Great, wonderful. And between now and then, just catch up with me on Twitter. All right? Take care, and y'all have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.